Okay, so thanks everyone here. Today I'll be speaking on the paper Weathering Challenges, Distributional Impacts of Climatic Shocks on Household Consumption in Mozambique. So to start with, as we know, developing countries are likely to experience disproportionate effects from climate change compared to developed countries. But on top of that, these developing countries also face issues with low revenue collection and limited state capacity that further hinder their ability to combat the impacts of this climate shocks that they are going to face. But not only inequality might arise in the international stage coming from this climatic shocks, but also within each single country, there might be inequality arising from this climate change. The reason for that is, well, two reasons for that is that, first of all, weather shocks and climate shocks are likely to be spatially heterogeneous, which means that some regions might be more impacted than others. And also for each given region in a country, you might have different parts of the population with different abilities to adapt to any type of climate change. And Mozambique, the setting which we're studying here, is a very interesting setting because it's one of the poorest and most vulnerable countries in the world to climate shocks, ranking 5th in the climate risk index. The way that Mozambique's climate vulnerability is expressed is mostly through two paths. The first one is droughts, and the second one is heavy rainfall-related shocks, which would include tropical storms, floods, or cyclones. And both these types of shocks are very common in the country. They happen very often. However, the way that they are distributed is spatially heterogeneous, with the south being more commonly impacted with droughts, and the north and center of the country being more impacted by heavy rainfall shocks. What we're going to try to do in this paper is to examine the average and the distributional impacts of these climate shocks in household consumption, and we're going to focus specifically in climate shocks during the growing season in agriculture. And we are also going to try to uncover what are the coping mechanisms that households might have in this case of extreme climate vulnerability. So I'm going to skip the preview and contributions. Let's lean a little bit more on what is this climate vulnerability. So in the last two waves of the household budget survey in Mozambique, they added a calamities questionnaire where they asked the population, the households, if they had been impacted by any calamities, droughts or floods or heavy rainfall-related shocks. And we see that 14% of households have been impacted by a drought and 22% have been impacted by a heavy rainfall-related shock. So that's a large part of the population that says that they have been impacted by that. And this then is expressed in terms of the household's well-being by losses in many fronts. So they have losses in terms of flood, in terms of animals that they were raising. These effects might be different depending on the type of shock that they are facing. But one thing that is common is that these households are severely impacted in terms of losses of crops and seeds, which indicates to us that it's very important to understand how these climate shocks impact the growing season in agriculture, especially given that Mozambique is a country heavily dependent on subsistence agriculture. The data that we have mainly comes from, first, the budget survey, the IOF, and we have 4 waves of the IOF starting in 2008 and going up to 2023. We're going to focus specifically on non-durable goods, essential non-durable goods, which will include food, water and beverages, and some vice goods that would include cigarettes and alcohol. And in terms of climate, we have data on temperature and on precipitation. Or temperature data comes from MERA, so it's satellite data, and precipitation comes from the GPCC, so the same thing that Anna had here. And we're going to focus specifically on shocks during the past growing season, so from November to April, and we're going to look at the average temperature during this time and the accumulated precipitation during this time. There are 2 important things to know about household consumption of essential goods in Mozambique. The first one is that the country is very vulnerable in terms of consumption. Between 50 to 20% of the population is below this line, which indicate the value of a basic food basket. So in consumption, we have this amount. If we look specifically for expenditures, so items that were bought, the figure is even more stark, with between 75 and 50% of the population that is below this basic consumption line. So from that, we know it's very vulnerable, and also home production, the subsistence agriculture, is something that is very important for households. Now, the way that we build our climate extreme events is we're going to look at each district in the country, and we're going to place the past growing season weather on their historic distribution of weather. And if they are on the top quintile or on the bottom quintile of the distribution, we will consider that an extreme event. So an extreme high rainfall shock or an extreme low rainfall shock, and the same goes for temperature. Our main specification is very simple. We're going to have one fixed effect for district level to capture district fixed characteristics. We're going to control for year quarter fixed effects to control for any type of macroeconomic fluctuations in the country. We also control for region and sector trends throughout the years, and we're going to be interested in the coefficients for temperature and precipitation extremes, which will compare what would be a normal weather during the growing season with an extreme weather. And our outcomes will be either expenditure or consumption levels of these non-durable goods, or some recenter influence function transformation of this type of statistics. So going into our results, what we find is that if you have a high temperature shock, the expenditures of households go down by around 17% throughout the year following this growing season, and high rainfall shocks are followed by a reduction of around 7.3% in the expenditures of households following this growing season on these non-durable essential goods. However, when we look at total consumption, we don't find significant effects, which indicate to us that, at least for these types of shocks, households are adapting by some way of enhancing their home production. However, to try to get a better sense of maybe we're not capturing drought very well with our measures here, since this is something that is difficult to capture, we also look at low SPI events. And when we're using specifically low SPI, we see a 10% reduction in expenditures throughout the year, and also a reduction of the same size in terms of consumption, which might indicate for this specific type of shock, households are less able to adapt with home production. Now, leaning into the distributional impacts, if we look at heavy rainfall shocks, we can find that the bottom of the distribution is more heavily impacted by this type of shock. So the bottom tertile is where this is more heavily concentrated. But high temperature shocks are something that's spread out more in the consumption distribution. So up from the 20th percentile up to the 70th percentile, we see households being more severely impacted by high temperature shocks. However, this decreases as we go up to the top of the distribution, with the very top not being very impacted. If we try to look on the likelihood of a household being above a basic food consumption basket, we see that this distribution effects are translated into the likelihood of consuming above this basket. The other thing we do is let's try to see what is the share of home production in total consumption, and we find that households become more reliant in home production when they are impacted by high temperature and high rainfall shocks. And this is something that is not specific to the poorest or the richest people in the population. It's actually very similar regardless of you being above the basic food basket consumption or below the basic food basket consumption. And lastly, we also look what is the ability of the social subsidy program, the main cash transfer program in Mozambique, to try to mitigate these types of shocks. And we find that they actually have some ability in mitigating these types of shocks. So if you look at the interaction between receiving PSSB and having a rainfall shock, we see that they are mitigating part of the effect and also low rainfall shocks. And this is something that is very interesting because, as we saw in the presentation today by Hannah, this subsidy program is very limited, and also the receiving of payments can have very long delays. So even if this cash transfers is unreliable, they still help the population somewhat when you are a recipient of the program. So just to conclude, our findings reveal that unusually warm or rainy growing seasons can reduce families' expenditures on essential goods throughout the year, and the households will increase their reliance in home production to try to smooth out the consumption. However, when they do that, they are doubling down in this type of home production, subsistency agriculture, which might reinforce them in a poverty trap, keeping them away from activities that are more market-driven. And besides that, we also see that although the social programs in Mozambique have very limited capacity and have infrequent payments, they can still mitigate the shocks if you are someone in the recipient group. Some last thing is that although we find no evidence of family transfers being able to mitigate the shocks in our analysis, this could be driven by the timing in which we are analyzing. So we are analyzing more medium-term shocks, so the months, the trimesters of the years after the past growing season, and maybe if these transfers are happening as the shock is happening, we wouldn't be able to capture that. So we are not able to provide evidence on that, but we're not ruling that out. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.